About 80% of the antiretroviral drugs used in Africa to fight HIV and AIDS are imported, and in Ivory Coast, many people living with the disease are not getting the treatment they need.
Genetically modified organisms, also known as GMOs, they are a big controversy in Nigeria, with farmers and civil groups condemning the government's recent rulings on the products.
And in Rwanda, a young African fashion designer is putting his own modern twist on men's clothing styles from the 1960s. Africa 54 starts right now.
Hello and welcome. I am Adeshewa Josh at Channels Television here in Lagos. Stay with us in the next half hour for stories from around Nigeria and the world.
And I'm Esther Gido at the Voice of America, coming to you from Studio 52 at our global headquarters here in Washington.
First up on our show, genetically modified organisms. Are they safe? The Nigerian government recently issued 2 permits to Monsanto Corporation for the commercial release of GMO cotton and for a field trial of GMO maize. The move sparked widespread condemnation from farmers, civil society, and other groups. Our correspondent, Gloria Umezioke, has more on this.
54-year-old cassava farmer Benga has been in the business of farming using traditional breeding methods. Visiting his farm, it is evident that, like some farmers, he knows about genetically modified crops, which is simply technology that allows transfer of genes between organisms. He tells me that the knowledge among farmers is limited. Farmers are cultivating new plant species through selective breeding. The reward is naturally modified plants. On the other hand, scientists are developing new seedlings, otherwise known as genetically modified organisms. The debate right now is whether or not they should be introduced into the country.
It's not a natural thing. It's more or less a way of forcing nature out of its course. Because you are taking gene from a DNA of a specific variety of organism, extracting it, and at the same time artificially infusing it into another species. But people should be able to know that, okay, yes, I want a natural one. I don't want a GMO one. There should be labeling and there should be adequate information so that people will know what is it all about.
Mr. Benga gave this advice against the backdrop of an alleged introduction of GMO maize and cotton into the country by the nation's biosafety agency. The lawmakers' accusations raised several questions and concerns.
Recently, reports that the National Biosafety Management Agency issued 2 permits for the commercial release and placing on the market of genetically modified cottons and confined field trial maize to Monsanto Agriculture Nigeria Limited.
The agency's Director General allayed fears, explaining that the said genetically modified maize is still under observation and would not be released without thorough research and deliberation.
We will analyze them and make sure they are safe, and if they are safe, we want to know, even whether they are safe or not, those importers of those products, we are going to invite them to check whether they have any permit from anybody in this country, if that permit is not from our agency.
However, a group of farmers react differently.
We strongly object to the release of genetically modified organisms, probably called GMOs, in Nigeria.
As a result of these new revelations about GMO in Nigeria, it remains critical for the government to educate the public about the realities of the 20-year-old technology, which is widely accepted in the United States, but banned in countries like Russia. Gloria Umezioke, Channels Television News.
And now for more on the controversies surrounding GMOs in Nigeria, we are pleased to be joined by Dr. Ayola Shoyombo, a geneticist at the Landmark University, Kwara State. Welcome, Dr. Shoyombo. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to explain to our viewers what genetically modified organisms are.
Now, the truth about it is that people are not adequately informed about what GMOs are. GMOs are not as bad, or they're not the way people have actually portrayed them. When you look at an organism, it simply means scientists identifying a particular trait that is of interest to them from whatever organism, picking that particular trait or character, and then infusing it into another organism.
Okay, so obviously there is misinformation out there in some parts of the country.
And that's exactly what's happening.
Explain to us the advantages of using GMOs.
It simply means that a gene which produces a toxin which repels insects is introduced into this crop plant such that insects can no longer affect this particular maize. It simply means now that the input of farmers into such a field is greatly reduced, and therefore his profit is increased, making the food more available and at cheaper price. Again, it simply means that the effect of herbicides, pesticides on such crops is greatly reduced, which are known to emit greenhouse gases. So the effects of these gases on climate change is drastically reduced.
Let me ask you now, obviously, as you've seen in that report, some lawmakers are kicking against it. There is a misconception out there, and indeed in some cases, in some research, genetically modified fruits and crops have been linked to some terminal diseases. How, in this case, do we make sure that the use of GMO is controlled and is done the way it should be done?
Well, basically, if you look at the benefits of GMO in terms of disease resistance, in terms of sustainability of the population, in terms of increased flavor and nutrition, in terms of longer shelf life, and in terms of lower prices, you cannot link it up with some of these things a lot of people have come up with. Like I rightly said, I think one of the major challenges we have now is a misinformation. I am yet to see a particular article, scientifically proven article, that has linked the consumption of GMOs to any terminal ailment.
Dr. Ayola Shoyombo, thank you so much for speaking to us on Africa 54.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Moving from African agriculture to health now, the prevalence of HIV and AIDS is relatively low in West Africa compared to the rest of the continent, but treatment rates there are also low. In Ivory Coast, about 2/3 of people living with HIV and AIDS are not on antiretroviral treatment. Emily Eob has the story from Abidjan.
Stéphane Aliali Kwame walked this neighborhood in Abidjan every day to visit people living with HIV/AIDS.
Ils ont déjà fait le dernier test de l'enfant? C'était comment? Négatif. Okay.
Treatment with antiretroviral drugs can reduce mother-to-child transmission during pregnancy and birth. Kwame works for the local NGO Lumière Action, which runs a treatment center nearby. He says people fall out of treatment for many reasons. Some become discouraged, some become misguided by charlatans touting cures, others don't have enough money to pay for transport to the clinic, and then there is the stigma.
Just last week, a couple came to the clinic and they recognized one of the nurses, so they didn't want to come back to get their treatment. They asked me to bring it to them. They stigmatize themselves sometimes.
The clinic also offers free HIV tests. Ivory Coast made antiretroviral medications free in 2008. Since then, the percentage of people on ARVs has doubled to about 30%. But 8 groups say this is still too low. Clinics frequently run out of stock.
For first-line treatment, there is no problem. But for the second line, there are always stocks out. We are people living with HIV and AIDS. We are told we have a lifelong treatment to follow. We cannot understand that today there are stockouts.
Since last year, an alert system has been implemented. When a clinic runs out of stock, it contacts RIP+, a coalition of 68 local NGOs working on HIV/AIDS. RIP+ gets in touch with the Ivorian authorities to try to get the medicine. Treatment with antiretroviral drugs can slow the virus spread in the body and delay the onset of AIDS. Antiretroviral drugs, or ARVs, in Ivory Coast are financed by initiatives like the Global Fund and PEPFAR, along with the government, but the demand remains high, and so is the cost.
We could better the situation by producing the ARVs locally, not necessarily within the country, but within the sub-region. That could lower the costs.
About 80% of ARVs used in Africa are imported from abroad, and many countries are pushing to produce locally. South Africa recently announced the creation of a state-owned company to manufacture ARVs there. Emilia for VOA News in Abidjan.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, the mighty elephant, often seen as a gentle giant, but for farmers in Kenya, living alongside the animal presents many challenges. That story after the break.